As part of the Fulbright Distinguished Awards in Teaching grant, I've spent the last 5 months here in India looking at new initiatives in vocational education. As a vocational educator in America, I thought this was a timely project because both countries are really looking to increase the level of post-secondary workforce readiness in all of their graduates through the introduction of new vocational programming. Actually, in the U.S., we don't use that term anymore. We've replaced it with career and technical education, or CTE, primarily because of the negative stigma that's associated with vocational, which is a shame because the root of the word, vocare, to call or to find one's calling, is pretty indicative of the value of vocational education in secondary schools. But I'll be using both of the terms interchangeably. So why India? Well, both countries have a similar perceived skills gap that we'll be talking about, and both have cultural attitudes towards work that underscore a hierarchy of knowledge in the sense that some jobs are valued more than others in the community. But primarily because both countries are really looking at providing resources, both in funding and in programming, into increasing post-secondary workforce readiness amongst high school students. And there's a lot of reasons why. Both socioeconomically as well as individually, the impacts that unemployment have on youth, even students that have earned a degree. That was primarily the focus of educational policy in both nations for the last 10 to 15 years, are finding themselves either unemployed or underemployed, even after earning that degree. And the impacts of these can be very long-lasting, these segments of the population of unemployment. At a economic level, industry is suffering because they often find themselves with vacancies they can't fill simply because they don't have enough graduates that are qualified to fill them. With such a huge workforce, India has been launching a series of initiatives. In fact, there's 17 different ministries currently involved in skill development. But my focus here was on the new National Skills Qualification Framework that's been implemented to increase the level of vocational programming at the secondary level across all government schools in the country. And this is being administered in class or grades 9 through 12. A lot of this model, a lot of this policy was formulated based on best practices from around the world. And as we all know, no one model will work in all countries. So the focus of my research was to glean best practices that can be integrated into any model, and hopefully make some quality recommendations based on those best practices for both the U.S. in my school district and here in India. Why? Well, there's a lot of data that supports the value of career and tech ed in schools, and these different studies show they can help increase academic motivation, decrease the dropout rate, as well as help generate lifelong learning sentiments amongst students. But even with all those benefits, there's still a lot of challenges, such as the negative perception of vocational education being only for certain students and only for certain jobs. There's also a huge disconnection between the educational system and our workforce that helps lead to a growing skills gap. Each time one of these best practices addresses a critical challenge, I'll note that with a star here. One more quick terminology question we want to answer is that of skills gap. We hear this word a lot, both in India and in the US. And in my research, I found that really there's 3 separate meanings. While they're related, there's different causations, and there's also different solutions. The classic example of a skills gap is where the skills that students are leaving our classrooms with are not aligning with what skills are actually needed within the workforce. Also from a employer's perspective, the soft skills or professional skills, as I like to call them, global competence such as communication and collaboration, that are needed in really any career field, students aren't leaving our classrooms with those either. But from a student perspective, another skills gap that exists is the lack of knowledge of what kind of careers are out there for potential career pathways that align with students' interests and strengths. And all of these best practices that we'll look at will help address some aspect of this skills gap, as well as some of the other challenges that were introduced in the beginning. Lots of acronyms in my methodologies. I began with a policy review of the national policy and some of the shaping concepts that came from international policy. I spent a lot of time with curriculum, including the sector skill councils that are devised of industry members and the national occupation standards that they developed, and also the organizations, both the public-private partnerships as well as the government organizations developing curriculum at the secondary level, as well as the post-secondary level and the linkages between them. And finally, to look at implementation, I spent some time doing interviews both with the public-private partnerships as well as the schools, the principals, teachers, and students that were actually involved in the new programming. And from that, I've chosen 5 best practices that I think that we could implement either differently or just a little better at both the Boulder Valley School District as well as here in India. So the first practice I'd like to address is rather than being supply-driven, vocational education programs are demand-driven. And what this means is that data is being used to look at what are the professional skills needed in a 21st century workforce, both at a national level as well as at a local level. And what this does is create linkages between education and industry to help bridge that gap, and addresses that first definition of the skills gap in that the skills that are being offered at the secondary level are ones that will relate to workforce outcomes. And in doing so, this creates meaningful applications for students of both their academic as well as potentially vocational training courses. The good news is a lot of this data exists. In Rajasthan, for example, the state of Rajasthan I pulled up this data from the National Skills Development Corporation, who's done a survey of every state in the country to look and identify potential skills gaps. Our own Bureau of Labor Statistics looks at this exact information and relates it in their handbook. And even at the state level, our different career clusters and the job roles within the career clusters are investigated to determine where these areas of growth are. The piece that we need to address, however, and the recommendation I'd like to make, is at the local level. With that in mind, my recommendation is that there is a creation of a localized advisory committee. Now, we do have advisory committees in the U.S. for every individual vocational program. It's a state requirement, and that means that I have for my advisory committee a series of meetings involving industry members from agriculture that tell me about latest trends that help approve curriculum. But one thing they can't do is tell me if we need a manufacturing program. So the creation of a localized advisory committee would be at a district level and would involve players such as the Workforce Boulder County, the Chamber of Commerce. It could involve industry leaders as well as other members from the educational community to help guide decisions around ICAP and CTE programming. Here in India, this could work at the state and district level through the district program coordinators and the local panchayats that could help make those decisions as well. If we've done this successfully, then the idea is that every student who has been advised on different vocational opportunities has a clear picture of what the local needs are. And in doing so, if we've been successful, then 100% of BVSD graduates, or in India, the National Skills Qualification Framework graduates, would be enrolled in some sort of post-secondary education, some training, or formal employment within 1 year of graduation. So a neat percentage of 0. Now, that can't happen with just the creation of this advisory committee, and that's where some of the other best practices come in. One best practice that absolutely should be a part of, and is to some degree already a part of the Boulder Valley School District model, is that it is student-centered. So students are given opportunities to explore self-interests and motivations, look at their strengths, and then have an opportunity to test these out in a safe environment. What this does is it uses student-centered research to help drive the process and creates a personalized pipeline so that students go from a more broad examination of their kind of knowing themselves and knowing what skills that they already have and what interests and aptitudes they have into more and more narrowly focused so that they can apply some of these skills in a chosen career pathway. In doing so, it addresses one of the skills gap challenges of exposing students to how their academic and vocational skills can be used in the real world. Again, what this looks like, we already have a lot of tools that can help. For example, in Colorado, we have access to Naviance, which is a computer-based sort of counseling system that allows students to set personal goals, career goals, and also to explore potential careers. But we can further add to that with other tools such as Indigo that look at more personal aptitudes, or look at the example from here in India. There's a product, it's called My Kensho, that is process driven over 4 years, that allows students to really look at themselves as learners and then look at how they can relate to the community around them by exploring different career opportunities. So both the data-driven and the student-centered approaches are already somewhat being practiced here in India as well as the U.S. One recommendation I would make on this practice is to continue to utilize the online tools and then further develop curriculum for students that allow them to personalize their career exploration experience. In Boulder Valley School District, this would look like a link for outcomes from some of these activities on Naviance or Indigo to current course offerings that might include vocational education courses. And all of these will be placed within an overall framework and pipeline for the ICAP, which we'll talk about in just a minute. In India, this could look at the local level of modules that exist for all students, not just those participating in vocational classes that are designed by the Central Institute of Vocational Education that help introduce them to concepts and strengths. A model that currently exists, My Kensho, has been developed and is being piloted in Kerala right now. So if we've been successful in creating this sort of student-centered practice, then 100% of all graduates will have at least one or two career pathways of interest that they've identified, and they've been able to explore these prior to graduation as well. Now, the first two practices are already to some degree being implemented, both in India and in the US. This next one, however, I think is critical. And it's one that we don't actually see except for a few models abroad in Germany and in Switzerland. But I think it's one that can really address some of the most deeply rooted challenges in vocational education programming, and that's 100% participation. So rather than having vocational education available just to kids who quote unquote need it because of socioeconomic reasons or because they haven't been previously successful in academic classrooms, we have all students actually introduced to concepts within vocational education at an earlier age. So what this could do is it can help end the negative social bias against CTE because everyone's participating and everyone's getting to explore their potential and answer one's calling. So the benefit is recognizable for all students, not just a few. And in doing so, it creates a platform for some of those soft skill development. For example, all students need to know how to conduct themselves in a job interview. All students need to be able to make a presentation or conduct a job search. So exposing students at an earlier age to some of these universal skills opens up vocational education essential skills for all students. So what does this look like? Well, in Germany, it looks like a 3-week period where all students are required to create and undergo their own internship in a career field of their choice. It might initially look like lessons in the classroom that are conducted in the 6th or 7th grade with a counselor or with a classroom instructor in a content area. But it becomes increasingly more personalized and driven by students' own interests, so that some students might end up in an internship or others in a mentorship situation, while still others might create a research project. All still based on these sort of career exploration and professional skills. So my recommendation for the implementation of this best practice is to create a supplementary curriculum platform. This would allow students to explore the world themselves, first off, and the world of work, and would also give them an introduction to the different pathways that different aptitudes or interests might lead them on. Our school district has a learning management system that it's adopted, Schoology, and so I've created this platform within Schoology for each grade. This resource is available to all teachers in the district, and the hope is that teachers will help populate these within each of these grade levels. Are student-directed activities, teacher-directed activities, and counselor-directed activities. And the teacher-directed activities, these would be content-specific. So for example, if a 7th grade learning standard is the personal narrative, and a teacher in one school has created a lesson plan that asks students to interview and relate up the personal narrative of a person's career journey, then that lesson plan is available here to all teachers in the district. So if we've been successful using this recommendation, then by the time a student graduates, they've had at least a couple of activities in every single grade from 6 till 12 that would be delivered within a core content class that looks at post-secondary workforce readiness. So this 100% participation, again, there's multiple entries